Welcome to something else entirely, where we center the weird so we may grow stronger in spirit.
Welcome back. I believe that next best thing is to get us on the same page about some key terms. So today we're going to go through some isms. I have about 3 isms and some props. So here's the props. The whole vibe of this thing's pretty analog, so here we go. If you were trained as a scientist or an engineer, as I was, what I'm going to explain to you now may feel a bit like trying to explain water to a fish. At least that metaphor is what I'm using to make myself feel better about the fact that it took me, 2 decades to catch on. First, I will tell you a story to convince you to stick it out for the next 20 minutes about why these isms, learning about these isms, is worth your time. And there are many more stories coming, I assure you, but we'll start with this one. So, this is from Dean Radin, Real Magic. And this is from a historian, Michael Shermer, who was a prominent skeptic of all things paranormal. He wrote for Scientific American, which, if you don't know, is a very reputable outlet. And so in Shermer's 2016 column of Scientific American, he asked, note the year 2016, that's going to be important, 2016. Is it possible to measure supernatural or paranormal phenomena? His answer was an unambiguous no. Where the known meets the unknown, we are tempted to inject paranormal and supernatural forces to explain unsolved mysteries. We must resist the temptation because such efforts can never succeed, not even in principle. And so with that, he slammed the door shut. And so this is kind of standard skeptical fare, right? Saying, if we want to look at things like near-death experiences, telepathy, etc., paranormal or supernormal experiences, we must resist the temptation because it can never succeed. I would like to be clear here that I myself am a skeptic sympathizer, as I spent nearly 2 decades as an intense cynic because I thought it made me smart. I'll come back to that narrative later, but here's where the story gets weird. So in 2014, so that's 2 years earlier, in October of 2014, in the same column in Scientific American, he opened with the following admission. Often I am asked if I ever encountered something that I could not explain. What my interlocutors have in mind are not bewildering enigmas, such as consciousness or U.S. foreign policy, but anomalous and mystifying events that suggest the existence of the paranormal or supernatural. My answer is yes, now I have. And so the question is, have I ever encountered something I could not explain? And in 2014, he's saying, yes, now I have. And so then he goes on to describe this event when he was planning to marry his fiancée, Jennifer Graff. Her grandfather was the closest she had to a father figure, but tragically died when she was 16 years old. One of the few heirlooms she kept from her grandfather was a 1978 Philips transistor radio. Shermer, the guy we're hearing from here, the historian, Shermer tried to get it to work. He put in new batteries, looked for loose connections, and tried smacking it on a hard surface. Always the good method. Still, it wouldn't work. So he gave up and placed it in the back of a desk drawer in their bedroom. 3 months later, Shermer and Graff were married at their home in California. She was feeling sad that her grandfather wasn't there to give her away. After the wedding ceremony, something strange happened. They heard music. they traced it to the desk drawer in the bedroom. It was the grandfather's radio playing a love song. They were stunned into silence. Finally, she whispered, "My grandfather is here with us. I'm not alone." The radio continued to play that evening, fell silent the next day, and never worked again. Schirmer's reaction? I have to admit, it rocked me back on my heels and shook my skepticism to its core. As a result, he wrote, still reeling with awe, if we are to take seriously the scientific credo to keep an open mind and remain agnostic when the evidence is indecisive or the riddle unsolved, we should not shut the doors of perception when they may be open to us to marvel in the mysterious. And Radin goes on to say, I can't speculate about Schirmer's change of heart, referring to from 2014 to 2016. But one thing we do know is that when one encounters a belief-shattering event, it's not uncommon to promptly forget about it or even deny that it has ever happened. Psychologists use the term repression to describe such cases. Remember that repression, we'll come back. As magician Peter Carroll once put it, when people are presented with real magical events, they somehow manage not to notice. If they are forced to notice something uncontrovertibly magical, they may become terrified, nauseated, and ill. And so this brings us back to the question from last episode, which is, how much truth are we willing to handle? How strong are our spirits? Can we look at this truth without becoming terrified, nauseated, or ill? Or perhaps we become some of those things, but we choose to look at it anyway. So let's circle back to this idea of repression. Psychologists use the term repression to describe such cases, referring to this forgetting. I would guess that as I am telling you these stories, at least some of you, if not nearly every one of you, is suddenly recalling, oh yeah, that one time something weird like that happened to me. When was the last time you told someone that story? It seems to me we have a bit of amnesia as it relates to these types of very real, lived, magical experiences. So where does this amnesia come from? Why are we so resistant to accepting these phenomena as part of our consensus reality? This leads us to why we need to understand the isms. So, onto a brief history of science and some questionable isms that are so deeply embedded we no longer even feel the grip that they have on our minds. The way I like to think about the isms, and we'll get to them, reductionism, materialism, scientism, many other isms, but those are the ones we're going to cover. The way I like to think about it is, think about when you wear something uncomfortable. And bless your heart if you've never worn anything uncomfortable, but I did wear some uncomfortable things in my 20s. And so you just forget. You put these jeans on that are way too tight for you, and you kind of are wearing them and you forget how tight your jeans are gripping you until you get home, and then you take your jeans off and you're so relieved. That's what it feels like to let go of the questionable isms. It's like taking off uncomfortable clothes. Feels like relief. And I'm not saying you need to let go of these isms. I am just hoping that you will consider that they are questionable. And so, ism 1, reductionism. I don't know if that's going to be backwards. Reductionism. I don't know. Figure it out. Reductionism. So reductionism essentially says that if you break something into smaller parts, eventually you will understand the whole. So if we think about psychology can be reduced to biology, biology can be reduced to chemistry, chemistry can be reduced to physics, physics can be reduced to mathematics, matter and energy. There are many highly educated physicists and scientists who can explain to you why reductionism is damned. I recommend Donald Hoffman. I'll put some links in the show notes of YouTube videos. A book in 2019 he wrote called The Case Against Reality: How Evolution Hid the Truth from Our Eyes. Essentially explains scientifically that this premise that everything can be reduced down to more fundamental particles doesn't work. So that's the first ism. And these are deeply embedded in our scientific thinking when we look at the history of science. So there you have it, reductionism. Reducing everything down to the sum of its parts. And at the bottom of that, this is problematic too, at the bottom of that, matter and energy, it's just particles bumping around. And so essentially everything is meaningless or possibly predetermined. Ooh, yuck. Okay. Our second ism is materialism. Materialism is the doctrine that nothing exists except matter and its movements and modifications. So matter is the fundamental substance of reality, and everything that exists is either made of matter or dependent on matter. In the scientific worldview, this means the universe is composed entirely of physical stuff, atoms, particles, forces. Consciousness, which we'll get to in more depth in later episodes, we got to set up the isms first, okay? Consciousness is not a fundamental aspect of reality, but rather a byproduct of brain chemistry, right? So it comes out, it's produced by our neurons or action potentials or whatever. That consciousness is not fundamental, but is a byproduct of our brain chemistry. This is part of materialism. And if something can't be measured, quantified, or observed through physical instruments, it's either not real or not scientifically relevant. Okay, so this leads to a philosophy called, again, one more time, materialism. So we got it? 1, reductionism. Things can be reduced to their fundamental parts. 2, materialism. Another kind of consequence of materialism is that mind, soul, purpose, meaning, in the paradigm of materialism, these are seen as emergent illusions. They're not part of reality. They're just kind of a hallucination of our brains. And materialism is linked closely to physicalism, the belief that all phenomena, including our thoughts, feelings, and values, can be reduced to physical processes. And so part of the reason I am here is because materialism tends to breed nihilism. And I do see some nihilism out there in the world when I look around. Nihilism is the belief that life lacks inherent meaning, value, or purpose. Nihilism is kind of like, I give up, I don't know, it's bad, and there's no meaning or purpose in anything, and so I'm nihilistic. Materialism can lead to nihilism in a few ways. So, in a purely material universe, there's no purpose. Life's kind of an accident of chemistry and evolution, and just, oops, here we are. What do we do now? Humans are just temporary arrangements of atoms. And when we die, that's it. Lights out. Game over. The result of this is that it's easy to feel that nothing really matters to me. Okay. I'm going to regret that. I regret it already. This is NA, but I just need a breather here after that. I got to get through one more story quickly now. So this is a good one. The history, a little bit of a history of science. Also, if you're interested in more history of science, there is a book by Rupert Sheldrake that I'll put also in the notes. I'm going to write that down, called Science Set Free, which talks about the history of science and how we've been led to these different beliefs. But now I'm going to talk about one of our great scientists who you may know, Galileo. And so in 1623, Galileo wrote a 270-page letter to the Pope about things he saw in the sky in 1618. And so a lot of this letter was focused on, are these comets, because they were objects in the sky that were leaving fire behind. So are these comets, or are these some phenomena of perception? Are these real things? We don't know. And so in this 270-page letter to the Pope, Galileo makes a few key points that are going to be relevant for us here. So 1, nature is a book whose language is that of mathematics. This is a foundational idea for science. If you are a physicist, your sword is mathematics. The way you understand reality is mathematics. And every kind of scientific discipline develops their own understanding. For biologists, they will say, you know, the understanding, the language in which we understand nature is DNA. For neuroscientists, they might speak of neurotransmitters and action potentials. But regardless, every branch of science has a language it uses to understand nature. And Galileo goes on to say, he talks about little birds, starlings. He says, I don't care if 100 starlings say something. What matters is what the eagle finds out through experiment. So here he's saying, you know, this isn't a democracy. We're not going to vote to decide what the truth is. We do experiments and we get the answers. So that's in praise of the scientific method. And he goes on for a long time about other things, complaining, filing his complaints to the Pope about a whole variety of things. Anyway, and then at a ways in, he says, I'm paraphrasing, but says, okay, let's make a distinction here. There are certain things that lend themselves well to measurement and mathematics, and there are things that have to do with our senses, with smell and taste and pain and love. Let's leave those for later, right? Basically saying, okay, those are second rate. First, we will focus on the things that we can measure that are amenable to mathematics. And so what happened here is that we succeeded so much with math and materialism that we forgot we had left behind the second part. And that second part is consciousness, which we'll get into in great detail in later episodes. What is consciousness? Where does it come from? Is it something that is received or something that is produced or some combination of the two? And so today, just to recap, we have been through reductionism, the belief that everything can be reduced to smaller and smaller parts, and that will help you understand the whole. We have been through materialism, the belief that fundamentally everything is made of matter. Materialism can tend to breed nihilism, not necessarily, but it can. And for next time, we will be speaking about, I'm just going to introduce it here. Scientism. So, science and the scientific method are a beautiful way to inquire about the nature of reality. Scientism is a belief system altogether different from the scientific method, and we'll go into examples about that next time. And I really hope you guys will stick it out with me. I know that sometimes the terms can get dense, but if we really want to understand the depths of what's going on, right? Like I told you, where did that phone number come from? How did that girl know to move her car seat, right? How did that grandmother know you have to talk to your dad? These are the questions we're looking for the answers to. And so we have to get on the same page about some of these key terms and ideas and where they've come from, why they're so deeply embedded in our psyches, and what becomes possible when we let them go. And so, I thank you for your time and attention, and I'll see you next time.
Hey guys. Oh, airplane. That was episode 2. I will be honest, I woke up this morning with some fear. You know, that feeling, that voice that comes in that says, oh, what if episode 2 is not as good? And what if people don't like it? And blah, 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 blah. That inner critic is up early this morning. And I thought, well, what would I say to my students? And I've had students do projects like this that are creative expressions of themselves. And I thought I would say, well, here are some questions. Does this creation make you feel joyful? Do you feel joyful doing this? If yes, then keep doing it. And in this creation, do you feel more alive and more aligned with who you really are? Yes. Okay, then keep going. And then I would ask them, what are you afraid of? Oh, people aren't gonna like me. What if people judge me? Blah, 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 blah. Then I would say to those students, and in this moment to myself, those judgments have nothing to do with you. You are here for the joy of creating, and so create as an authentic expression of yourself, and all will be well. And I want to close with one little student story, which is of a student who they're really, really deeply scared of public speaking. And in class a couple weeks ago now, they volunteered, they raised their hand, volunteered to speak, and then told this beautiful story of something they'd learned in class, which I will share with you now. It's called the wilted flower. And the idea is that if you run into an orchid in the desert, you don't look at that orchid and say, oh, look at this orchid. It has wilting orchid disease. Something is wrong with it. You would say, why is this orchid planted in a desert? So the point of that story is obviously about the conditions in which we are allowed to thrive and grow. But in my telling of it, the point is about the bravery of overcoming that fear of believing, you know what? I am scared. I'm scared of speaking in front of people, but I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway because I think this information is important for people to know. That's exactly what that student did. And so if you've got something, some art you're working on or some project or some creation of yourself, leave a comment. I'd love to see it. And thank you for tuning in to something else entirely. We'll see you next time.